Chapter 16 of Gulliver of Mars. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James Christopher. Gulliver of Mars by Edwin L. Arnold. Chapter 16. The Martian told me of a merchant boat with 10 rowers which was going up to the capital in a couple of hours. And as the skipper was a friend of his, they would no doubt take me as supercargo, thereby saving me the necessity of passenger fees, which was obviously a consideration with me. It was not altogether a romantic approach to the dungeon of an imprisoned beauty, but it was practical, which is often better if not so pleasant. So the offer was gladly closed with, and curling myself in a rug of foxskins, for I was tired with much walking, sailors never being good foot gainers, I slept soundly till they came to tell me it was time to go on board. The vessel was more like a canal barge than anything else, lean and long, with the cargo piled in a ridge down the center as farmers store their winter turnips. The rowers sitting on either side of this plying oars like dessert spoons with long handles, while they chanted a monotonous cadence of monosyllables. Oh ho oh, oh ho oh, how high, how high. And then again, after a pause, how high, oh ho ho, oh ho ho. The which was infinitely sleep-provoking, if not a refrain of high intellectual order. I shut my eyes as we pulled away from the wharfs of that nameless emporium, and picked a passage through a crowd of quaint shipping, wondering where I was, and asking myself whether I was mentally rising equally to my extraordinary surroundings, whether I adequately appreciated the immensity of my remove from those other seas on which I had last travelled, tiller ropes in hand, piloting a captain's galley from a wharf. Good heavens! What would my comrades on my ship say if they could see me now steering a load of hairy savages up one of those waterways which our biggest telescopes magnify to but the thickness of an indication? No, I was not rising equal to the occasion, and could not. The human mind is of but limited capacity after all, and such freaks of fortune are beyond its conception. I knew where I was, but I knew I should probably never get the chance of telling it, and that no one would ever believe me if I did. And I resigned myself to the inevitable with sullen acquiescence, smothering the wonder that might have been overwhelming and passing interest of the moment. There is little to record of that voyage. We passed through a fleet of Arhap's warships, empty and at anchor in double lines, serviceable half-deck cutters, built of solid timber, not pumpkin rind it was pleasant to notice, and then the town dropped away as we proceeded up a stream about as broad as the Hudson at its widest, and profusely studded with islands. The water was bitterly salt, and joined another sea on the other side of the Martian continent. Yet it had a pronounced flow against us eastward, this tide running for 3 spring months and being followed, I learned, as ocean temperatures varied, by a flow in the opposite direction throughout the summer. Just at present the current was so strong eastwards the moisture beaded upon my rowers' tawny hides as they struggled against it, and their melancholy song dawdled in linked sweetness long drawn out, while the swing of their oars grew longer and longer. Truly it was very hot, far hotter than was usual for the season, these men declared, and possibly this robbed me of my wonted energy, and you, gentle reader, of a description of all the strange things we passed upon that highway. Suffice it to say, we spent a scorching afternoon, the greater part of a stifling night, moored under a mud bank, with a grove of trees on top from which gigantic fireflies hung as though the place were illuminated for a garden fete, and then, rowing on again in the comparatively cool hours before dawn, turned into a backwater at cockcrow. The skipper of our cargo boat roused me just as we turned, putting under my sleepy nostrils a handful of toasted beans on a leaf, and a small cupful of something that was not coffee, but smelt as good as that matutinal beverage always does to the tired traveller. Over our prow was an immense arch of foliage, and underneath a long arcade of cool black shadows, sheltering still water, till water and shadow suddenly ended a quarter of a mile down in a patch of brilliant colour. It was as peaceful as could be in the first morning light, and to me, over all, there was the inexpressible attraction of the unknown. As our boat slipped silently forward up this leafy lane, a thin white feather in her mouth alone breaking the steely surface of the stream, the men rested from their work and began, as sailors will, to put on their shore-going clothes, the while they chatted in low tones over the profits of the voyage. Overhead flying squirrels were flitting to and fro like bats, or shelling fruit whereof the husk fell with a pleasant splash about us, and on one bank a couple of early mothers were washing their babies, whose smothered protests were almost the only sound in this morning world. Another silent dip or two of the oars, and the colour ahead crystallized into a town. If I said it was like an African village on a large scale, I should probably give you the best description in the fewest words. From the very water's edge up to the crown of a low hill inland extended a mass of huts and wooden buildings, embowered and partially hidden in the bright green foliage, with here and there patches of millet, or some such food plant, and the flowers that grow everywhere so abundantly in this country. It was all Arcadian and peaceful enough at the moment, and as we drew near the men were just coming out to the quays along the harbour front, the streets filling, and the town waking to busy life. A turn to the left through a water gate defended by towers of wood and mud, and we were in the city harbour itself. Boats of many kinds moored on every side, quaint craft from the gulfs and bays of nowhere, full of unheard of merchandise, and manned by strange faced crews, every vessel a romance of nameless seas, an epitome of an undiscovered world. And every moment the scene grew busier as the breakfast smoke rose, and wharf and gangway set to work upon the day's labours. Our boat, loaded as it turned out with spoil from Seth, was run to a place of honour at the bottom of the town square, and was an object of much curiosity to a small crowd which speedily collected and lent a hand with the mooring ropes, the while chatting excitedly with the crew about further tribute and the latest news from overseas. At the same time a swarthy barbarian, whose trappings showed him to be some sort of functionary, came down to our captain, much wagging of heads and counting of notched sticks taking place between them. I, indeed, was apparently the least interesting item of the cargo, and this was embarrassing. No hero likes to be neglected, it is fatal to his part. I had said my prayers and steeled myself to all sorts of fine endurance on the way up, and here, when it came to the crisis, no one was anxious to play the necessary villain. They just helped me ashore civilly enough. The captain nodded his head at me, muttering something in an indifferent tone to the functionary about a ghost who had wandered overseas and begged a passage up the canal. The group about the quay started a little, but that was all. Once I remembered seeing a squatting, life-size heathen idol hoisted from a vessel's hold and deposited on a sugar box on a New York quay. Some ribald passer-by put a battered felt hat upon Vishnu's sacred curls, and there the poor image sat, an alien in an indifferent land, a sack across its shoulders, a billycock upon its head, and honoured at most with a passing stare. I thought of that lonely image, as almost as lonely I stood on the thitherman's quay, without the support of friends or heroics, wondering what to do next. However, a cheerful disposition is sometimes better than a banking account, and not having the one, I cultivated the other, sunning myself amongst the bales for a time, and then, since none seemed interested in me, wandered off into the town, partly to satisfy my curiosity, and partly in the vague hope of ascertaining if my princess was really here, and, if possible, getting sight of her. Meanwhile it turned hot with a supernatural heavy sort of heat, altogether, I heard passers-by exclaiming, out of the common, and after wandering for an hour through gardens and endless streets of thatched huts, I was glad enough to throw myself down in the shadows of some trees on the outskirts of the great central pile of buildings. A whole village in itself, of beam-built towers and dwelling-place, suggesting by its superior size that it might actually be Arhap's palace. Hotter and hotter it grew, while a curious secondary sunrise in the west, the like of which I never saw before, seemed to add to the heat, and heavier my eyelids, till I dozed at last, and finally slept uncomfortably for a time. Rousing up suddenly, imagine my surprise to see sitting, chin on hands, about a yard away, a slender girlish figure, infinitely out of place in that world of rough barbarians. Was it possible? Was I dreaming? No, there was no doubt about it. She was a girl of the hither folk, slim and pretty, but with a wonderfully sad look in her gazelle eyes, and scarcely a sign of the indolent happiness of Seth in the pale little face regarding me so fixedly. "Good gracious, miss," I said, still rubbing my eyes and doubting my senses, "have you dropped from the skies? You are the very last person I expected to see in this barbarian place." "And you too, sir. Oh, it is lovely to see one so newly from home, and free seeming, not a slave." "How did you know I was from Seth?" "Oh, that was easy enough," and with a little laugh she pointed to a pebble lying between us, on which was a piece of battered sweetmeat in a perforated bamboo box. Poor An had given me